Should I known better to treat a friend, waste the chance that I've been given. Born June 25th, 1963, George Michael recorded over 120 million records worldwide and is considered one of the cultural icons at the MTV generation. Achieved 7 number 1 songs on the UK singles chart and 8 number 1 songs on the US Billboard Hot 100. It was George Michael's first solo single and remains one of the greatest love songs of all time. Careless Whisper was co-written by George Michael with his warm partner, Andrew Ridgeley. They were 17 years old, developing as artists in 1981. George said in his autobiography, "I was on my way to DJ at the Bel Air when I wrote Careless Whisper. I have always written on buses, trains and in cars. It always happens on journeys." With Careless Whisper, I remember exactly where it first came to me, where I came up with the line, with the sax line. I remember very well where I was when I wrote things after one got off to the ground, but the Careless Whisper, I remember exactly the time and place. I know it sounds really weird and kind of romantic thing to say, but I remember exactly where it happened, where I was sitting on the bus, how I continued and everything. I remember I was handing the money over to the guy on the bus. I got this line, the sax line.
It's 3 a.m. I sent you voice message before I went to bed, and it said, call me in the morning when you wake up. My shirt is covered in your makeup. Dream about you every night, what the fuck? I'm falling for your love, I think I'm stuck. I got a bad habit of being stuck.
And that was Crape with his latest single. Check it out on SoundCloud, links in description. Then he moved away and I continued writing in my head. I wrote it totally in my head. I worked on it for about 3 months in my head. Inspired George and Andrew to write Careless Whisper was George's early romantic moment. George explained that much of the song's content is based on events from his childhood, which is inspired by 2 different girls named Jane and Helen. George says that when he was 12-13, he used to have to chaperone his sister, who was 2 years older, to a nice rink at Queensway in London. There was a girl with long blonde hair whose name was Jane. George continues to say that he was a fat boy in classes and had a big crush on her. Though he didn't stand a chance, his sister used to go and do what she wanted when she got the skating rinks and would spend the afternoon swooning over the girl Jane. A few years later, when he was 16, he had his first relationship with a girl called. It had just started to cool off a bit when he discovered that the blonde girl from Queensway had moved in just around the corner from his school. She had moved in right next to where he used to stand and wait for his next door neighbor, who used to give him a lift home from school. And one day he saw her walk down the path next to him and he thought, now, where did she come from? She didn't know it was him. It was a few years later and George looked a lot different, and they played a school disco with his band, the Executives, and she saw him singing and decided she fancied him. By this time she was that much older and big buxom thing, and eventually he started seeing her. She invited him one day when he was waiting for his lift, and then George Michael saw heaven on earth and never looked back, explaining that after he stopped wearing glasses, he began getting invited to parties. And the girl who didn't even see him when he was 12 invited him in. Damn. So he went out with her for a couple of months, but he didn't stop seeing Helen. He thought he was being smart. He had gone from being a total loser to being a two-timer. Should I know better to treat a friend? George says, I remember My sisters used to give me that time because they found out they really liked the first girl. Wasted chance that you've been given. Hence, the whole idea of Careless Whisper was the first girl finding out about the second, which never did. Oh, George Michael has guts. He then later started a relationship with Alex without finishing one with Jane, and all got a bit complicated. Jane found out about her and got rid of George. The whole time he thought he was being cool, being this two-timer, but there really wasn't any emotion involved. He didn't feel any guilt about the first girl, and he has seen her since, and the idea of the song was about her. Hence, them appearing in the music video of Careless Whisper dancing together. But she knew it was finished between him. George wasn't happy with the original version and at least went through production attempts twice. The first was during George's trip that he made to a legendary Muscle Shows studio in Alabama, where he worked with producer Jerry Rexer. But George wasn't happy with the version of Jerry and decided to re-record and produce the song himself, which ended up being the version that was released. After Wexler booked the top saxophone player from Los Angeles to do the famous solo, he arrived at 11 and should have been gone by 12, said Wham manager Simon Nippler Bell. Instead, after 2 hours, he was still there, while everyone in the studio shuddered with embarrassment. He just couldn't play the opening riff the way George wanted it, the way it had been on the demo, but that had been made 2 years earlier by a friend of George's who lived around the corner and played the sax for fun in the pub. George apparently told the saxophonist, "No, it's still not right, you see? It has to twitch upwards and a little just there, see, and not that, and not too much." When Napier Bell asked Rexer if George's dispute with sax sound was correct, Rexer replied, "Definitely, I've seen things like this before. There are some tiny nuances that the sax player is somehow not getting right. Although I can't hear what it is, it may be everything that will make the record a hit, as the success of pop records is so ephemeral, so unbelievably unpredictable. We can't take the risk of being impatient. But this sax player not going to get it, is he?" And the original version was released later in the year as a B-side special version on 12 in the UK and Japan. George went back to London Sam West's Studio 2 to re-record the track. Woo! Jazz musician Dan Forshaw later revealed that saxophonist Steve Gregory had got a call to re-record song sax solo, and he was the 11th saxophone player to record the solo, as George wanted to get the sound he hoped for. Steve waited and then discovered that the solo wasn't that easy to play in the written key, as his older Salma Mark, the 6th tenor, didn't have any top F key. So the engineer slowed the tape down so that Steve could record the solo a semitone lower than the intended. Once the tape was put back to normal speed, a unnatural saxophone sound was created that a bit like an alto in the Paul Desmond vibe, but can also listen to this right back to the script, but lacking a bit more depth and darkness to the sound. George Michael had just arrived at the studio and said, "That's the one, that's the sax solo I want." This could be down to the whole 80s synth concept where sound became increasingly manufactured, or just that George never recognized it was wrong. The single was released in August 1984 and reached #1 in the UK, ending a 9-week run at the top for Two Tribe by Frankie Goes to the Hole. It stayed at #1 for 3 weeks and the 5th best-selling song of 1984. It also topped the charts in 25 other countries, including the US, in February 1985 under the credit of Wham! Featuring George Michael. It was later named Billboard #1 song of 1985. Careless Whisper was released while Wham! Was still a group, but it was credited to George on his own in the UK. However, it was included in Wham's album Make It Big. The music video follows George playing a man showing his guilt over an affair and his acknowledgement that his partner, played by Lisa S., is going to find out. It was filmed on a location in Miami, Florida in 1984 and features places such as Coconut Grove and Watson Island. The final shot of the video shows Michael leaning out of a balcony at the last floor of Miami's Grove Towers. The original version of the video was edited with Jerry Wexler in 1983 version and also featured Andrew Wrigley in a cameo. Handing over a letter to a dark-haired George. According to producer John Roseman, the video was a fucking disaster. According to Acosta Lisa Stahol, they lost footage of our kissing scene, so we had to reshoot it again, which I didn't complain about. Should she really? Then George didn't like his hair, so he flew his sister over from England to cut it, and we had to reshoot more scenes. As the band felt they had screwed up the video, further footage of George singing on stage later shot at the Crape Theatre in London. Even though he was credited for the song, George said in 1991 that it was not an integral part of my emotional development. It disappoints me that you can write a lyric every flammantly and not particularly good lyric and it can mean so much to many people. That's delusioning for a writer. He later told The Big Issue in 2009, "I'm still a bit puzzled why it's made such an impression on people. Is it because so many people have cheated on their partners? Is it that they connect with it? I have no idea, but it's ironic that this song, which has come to define me in some way, should have been written right at the beginning of my career when I was still so young. I was only 17 and didn't really know much about anything, and certainly nothing much about relationships. The song was such a great hit that it was featured in this."